what's going on YouTube? Todd Castellan here. We're about to talk about practice. We're talking about practice. Like, we're talking about practice. Practice. Yeah, that's right, guys. Practice. I think it's I wouldn't say underrated, but we're just going to talk about like how practices have changed over the years. And what I mean by that is like how I view them and how some of my fellow bass fishermen view them. Like guys like Andrew and Hallman and my buddy Jason and all these guys, we always kind of talk about it and we're gonna kind of like discuss it, like what we think about how we should go about practices, and especially whether it's a one-day event or it's a one practice day for a one-day event, or whether you get to practice for 5 days or a week or 2 weeks or whatever it might be. It's how we kind of judge practice towards the tournament. So let's jump on in. Guys, wanted to thank all y'all for last year. This is pretty much my second video of the year, 2021. Hope it's going to be better than ever. Please subscribe. Tell me what y'all think. Hey guys, I haven't done one of these in a while. I haven't sat around and talked about something like this, just one-on-one with the camera, but I gotta be honest with you. It's like 20-something degrees outside and it's snowing in Texas. Like there's snow all over the ground right now. So fishing's just not something that I want to get out there and start doing at the moment. I think I'm going in the next day or two, but today we're gonna call it snow day. All right guys, practice back in the day was, I used to always hear this from all the big superstars, right? They all used to be like, hey man, I'm the first one at the boat ramp, the last one to get out. And I used to always take that mentality too, is I always wanted to practice, be the first one there, practice harder than everyone else. And I kind of always thought that was the way to do it, right? You are not going to outwork me. And I just didn't think much about it. It was like, I'm just going to practice harder than anyone. I'm going to be out there longer. I'm not going to take any breaks. And here's what I figured out is that works sometimes, but it doesn't work all the time. And I used to hear about these guys with zero practice. My buddy Jason Bond showed up to Cedar Creek in a TXTT, no practice, never been in the lake, and won the event, won a brand new boat. One of the coasters I won, I was sick pretty much the whole practice. I got like a day and a half of practice and I won the event. There, no doubt, almost everyone in the event practiced harder than I did, and I still won. Andrew Upshaw. We've always, if you've heard me and Hallman talk about Andrew won the Costa Championship on Cumberland last year. We all laughed at him because he was getting to the water at 10 a.m., getting off the water at 4. He just wasn't practicing very hard, but he was on them. And a lot of times that happens, right? So I'm gonna talk about, do we practice too hard sometimes? Do we not practice smart enough sometimes? That's kind of what I view practice now, is I want to be as smart as I can in practice, and sometimes that's working really hard, sometimes that's working really smart, and I'll kind of go over these. So first off, like let's take for example a major tournament where it's a multi-day event. 9 times out of 10 you can't know enough, you don't have enough days, and you can't find enough spots. Like if you had 100 spots, you want 101. If you had 10 ways to catch them, you want 11. And more practice days lets you figure out more spots and more ways to catch them. And that's great. But here's the problem. It depends on what time of the year that is. It depends on the weather. It depends on what the fish are doing. It might depend on current, non-current. It might depend on shade or like, it might depend on sun, clouds, rain. Like there's all these variables that get thrown in there, and 9 times out of 10, you don't get 7 days in a row of the same weather pattern. You do a little bit in the summertime, but almost every other time of the year, you never get that. So if you've got 3 days of it being sunny, and then the tournament starts and you got 3 days of it being cloudy, chances are everything's gonna change from those fish you found in the sun to the clouds. Like baits are gonna change, the way you fish, where you fish, all these things are different, and vice versa. Then you also got other days where it's cloudy for 2 days, sunny for 2 days, and then the tournament's going to happen and it's going to be cloudy for the tournament. So you have 2 days in there of just sun. Well, I've seen a lot of times when you catch them in the clouds, the way you catch them is so different. and then the sun comes around and you get out there and practice and everything you were doing doesn't work. Well, you go figure out all these other ways to catch them, but to be honest with you, 9 times out of 10, a lot of the times what you're doing, you know you're not going to do in the tournament because it's not going to be the same conditions. I'm not saying you don't go out there. I'm just saying you're kind of wasting. I always feel like sometimes I'm wasting all this time out there, and there's nothing I can do about it. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, I might all of a sudden be catching them on all these docks with all these shade, and it's all a shade thing, and I know it's going to be cloudy in the tournament, and none of that works. And I don't really know how to replicate that. Like, that's something I still work on to this day of, I still want to go out there and practice. I still want to go learn things. But to be honest with you, I know it's not me learning something for that event. So it's a tough battle. And a lot of times that's what we're trying to figure out is like, how do you make the most of those practices or those days? And it could be the opposite, right? Like you have 5 days of sun, 5 days of the event, and you get this one day where a storm blows through and it's just rainy that day. And it's usually probably the day you're going to crush on them, but none of that really matters. None of that is going to be like tournament day. And that could be any time of the year. And springtime, right? You have all these sunny days and you're catching them on a jerk bait, or you have all these sunny days and you're going to sight fish. You get these cloudy days where you can't sight fish, so now you can't practice, or it changes in the event. So that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about is like, what do you do on those days? And a lot of times I try really, really hard to duplicate what I'm doing if I can get away with it. If not, I at least just try to find areas with fish in there. And sometimes I just use them as other days, like especially if I'm boat dock fishing and I can't, and I'm going to need the sun and I'm going to need the shade. And I'm going to try to figure out maybe certain boat docks that are going to work. And so maybe that whole practice day, all I do is go graph boat docks and drive around the lake and look for them. And I use those days as days that, like, normally I probably wouldn't do that. Normally I probably wouldn't spend a whole day graphing docks or looking around for new docks. But I would use that day as a day of like, hey, I'm probably not going to catch them off docks, but let me go look at enough of them. Because usually when a tournament comes around, you know, I still kind of like to fly by the seat of my pants sometimes. I still like what if all these docks that you're catching them on, it doesn't work and you want to go fish new ones? So you got to figure out options of like, what else can I do to still be productive even though I'm not really going to fish a certain way or the conditions are going to change. That's one way. Here's the other one is, if you're really on them, how much do you really need to practice? And so this kind of came with Andrew, and it's happened to me before too, is say you're on them and there's, if you fish long enough, there are times, and even it doesn't matter if you're on them like crazy, if you're really catching them and you know what you're going to do, and sometimes that changes for you in the tournament, right? And you don't catch them, but it really doesn't matter. And let me explain that. If I'm catching them so good for 5 days on a certain bait, doing a certain thing, it doesn't really matter what goes on in that tournament. I'm going to stick with that, and I'm going to live with that decision. But if you figure that out in the first 2 days and you got 2 more days of practice, what do you go do? You can figure out other stuff, and if you try, in my experience, no matter what I figure out, it's never as good as that feeling you get when you think like, I'm going to win this thing doing this. And a lot of times you do win this thing doing this, but what do you do with these other 2 days? It just feels like you're out there wasting time. You're figuring out other ways to catch them. And in the back of your mind going, you know, I'm catching them all deep cranking, you know, and just giants. And no matter where you pull up, you figured it out. And all of a sudden you go up there throwing a spinnerbait, catching 2-pounders, and you're going, yeah, this is great, but there's no way I'm ever going to go throw a spinnerbait in this. I don't care if I'm zeroing at 12 o'clock. I'm going to go do this because I can win this in 10 minutes if I hit the right stretch or do whatever. So in the back of your mind, you know that's what you're going to do. What do you do in practice? I know Andrew in that tournament, he battled with that. He would still go out there and he would only go for a couple hours and come back in going, I've tried other stuff, but this is what I'm doing. And he won the event. So it's hard. You never want to tell someone, hey, don't practice as hard as work as hard. But over the years, I found out that that's a great motto. But the problem is, man, sometimes it's better to practice smart. Now, granted, I'm still a guy who figures out some things that like takes effort, right? And it's like it's hustling around. It's like making as many casts as possible. So it doesn't always apply to things like that when you're really just hitting 100 spots, driving all over the lake, fishing hard, and it's a spot deal where all you're going to do is how many spots can I get? How many spots? And then there's other tournaments where it's like I'm going to sit in this one little grass patch, or I'm going to go down a 100-yard stretch and I'm going to go over it and back and forth. So where does that leave you? So these are my practice dilemmas that we all get into. Even for these one-day events, they're a little bit different. One-day events, and now I'm kind of talking about team tournaments or BFLs or some of these deals. It kind of depends on what you're after. If it's me in a team event, 9 times out of 10, I'm looking to do something to win the event. And what I mean by that is like I'm going to go after the best possible scenario to win. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to go throw the biggest bait in the world and try to win the event doing it that way. It's like if I think I can catch them deep and that's the way to win, that's what I'm going to go do. Now, if I go practice deep all day long and I never catch a fish, I'm probably not going to do it in the tournament. Even though I know it's the way to win, I'll go shallow if I think I can catch fish, but I can't win. I'm still going to go salvage my deal, but I might practice deep the whole time. And that's a tough deal to do, but sometimes it works out that way. I always try to practice for the win, but it's easier in a team event when you got 2 people. Like you can figure things out twice as fast. And that's why I don't mind practicing that way. And when the event rolls around, doing something different, because now you can bounce stuff off your partner. You can you throw one bait, he throws one bait, and you can formulate a pattern. I wouldn't even say twice as quick. I'd say 3 times as quick or 4 times as quick. And the reason is a lot of times I'm throwing a bait that is, I would say, a standardized bait, like something that I know will catch him. But he might be trying to figure out all these other ways of a better way to catch him, that day, just that day. And so you can feed off of each other. So those practices you had might be totally different than your tournaments you're having. So that's just one of those deals. Practice fishing to me, I'm trying to learn a lot. I'm trying to gather what section of the lake is the best. I'm trying to figure out what baits are best to do it in those sections of the lake. I'm always usually trying to find backup stuff, if at all possible. And I'm doing this without trying to catch as many fish. And I know a lot of people are going to say, there's a big debate. Do you stick fish in practice or do you not? Here's the deal with that. I don't stick fish because I feel comfortable not sticking fish. When I get through with the tournament, if I didn't stick any fish and I didn't catch them in the event and I shook off a whole bunch, in the back of my head, I know, hey, it wasn't because I stuck a bunch of them. So in my opinion, it all comes down to how you feel about it. If you think sticking fish doesn't matter in practice and you go ahead and do it and you don't have any problems with it, go do it. I can't. In the back of my head, I'm like, that was dumb. I shouldn't have ever caught this fish. I personally think that hurts it, and you can always catch more fish in a tournament if you don't. I think if everyone did that, we would all catch more fish. And the reason I say that is, tell me a tournament you've ever fished in your life where practice, I'm not saying is better, but overall you would get a consensus of, hey, practice was a lot better than the actual event. Well, I think that's because when everyone got out there and practice, no one had been sticking them. And then all of a sudden, after days of people sticking fish, the tournament's not as good. So I just based it off that. But that's how you feel. And a lot of people are like, hey, the question is, well, how do I know how big they are? And you're right. I feel there's certain baits out there that if I get bit on them, they're usually a bigger fish. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Here's my thought on that. I always tell people if I had 10 spots, I don't really care how big they are. because I've never had so many spots in an event that I couldn't hit them all. Like I've never had so many that like, man, I fished this tournament and I had like 20 more spots with schools of fish and I couldn't hit any of them. No, I'm going to hit them, right? You just never have enough. And so I've never had enough. So I'm not worried how big they are. If I was throwing like a little Ned rig around or something really small, like a little drop shot, maybe. But then I kind of know it probably didn't matter where I went. That's the size fish I'm going to catch. So I'm going to throw a bait in there that I think would get a bigger bite. If I can get a bigger bite, chances are those are bigger fish. So that's kind of how I view practice and how I want to look at fish. But man, I've been to enough of these lakes that very rarely, and it's the way I fish, that if I went through a half-ounce spinnerbait around, that all I'm going to do is catch 12-inch fish. I mean, I've done this long enough that you can catch 5 of those and then catch 5 3-pounders in a row. A lot of times it isn't about the bait or anything. It's just how it goes that day. So I mean, to me, as long as you're kind of getting enough bites doing something that's not just going around throwing a crappie jig around getting little bites. If you're throwing a normal bait around, or if you're worried about it, switch to a bait. Switch to a bait where you're going to get bites that are a little bit bigger, and then it'll kind of help you determine that. So it's just those things you'll learn. And like I said, if you're topwater fishing, if you're throwing baits that you can see, not necessarily on top of the water, but a swim jig that's close to the surface where you can see one eat it, or you can see swirls, or a lot of times we always base stuff about how they bite, like especially flipping in grass or flipping in mats. We can tell a big bite as opposed to a small bite. So we kind of have an idea of what size fish they are. But topwaters, guys, topwaters, if anyone has hooks on their topwaters, I've never explained why, because you can see one blow up on it and kind of gauge how big it is. So those are my views on sticking fish in practice. But this is a practice video I wanted to share with you. I wanted to do one for a while, and I wanted to explain why practice have changed as I've gotten older. Like I said, man, I was out there. I was that guy, just what we always call a daylight to dark, man. We were just going as hard as possible, and I still do that. Like I still feel that way usually from the first day of practice, but as that practice progresses, I then kind of have a different view. Sometimes I still do it. Other days I realize that maybe the morning bite is just worthless, and I've seen things where that happens. I've seen sometimes where you stay out there till dark and fish start schooling like in the last hour, and it's great. You get all these bites, but you're not even going to be in the tournament hours when that stuff starts happening. So it's like, why am I still out there? And if I can't figure out how to catch those fish during the day, that's a worthless time for me to be out there figuring out where a bunch of schooling fish are when they won't school, before 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever your tournament time might be. So these are things to think about. Maybe you'll learn a little bit about this, about what y'all think about practicing for tournaments, and hopefully you'll be able to make a little bit better decisions come tournament day or in your practice days. We've got some more stuff coming down the pipe. Stay tuned.